Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Kara-Leah, and responding to a question that I got in my email today. I was on your website looking for tips to successfully return to normal life after a yoga retreat. It's tough to break habits. All my bliss quickly evaporated when I came home. Okay. So in answering a question here, what I'm actually seeking to do is to look at the erroneous thinking or assumptions that are underlying the question that are generating the experience of the person. Because that is actually what needs to be questioned. We're not looking to answer the question per se, or even to give the person what they think they want. I'm answering these questions from the perspective of awakening and liberation. So I'm making an assumption, which could totally be incorrect, that this person desires awakening, right? Which is a shift in identification from being identified with the I self to knowing oneself as awareness. And liberation is the dissolving of conditioning and apparent limitations of the human self. All right, so there's a number of things in here. So I'm going to start at the end, actually. All my bliss quickly evaporated when I came home. So the implication here is that this is a problem, the bliss evaporating, that something is wrong, the bliss evaporated, that something needs to be fixed, I need to stop the bliss from evaporating, okay? And there is an implicit assumption here that attainment of bliss is the goal or the intention or a marker of success, right? And this is critical to understand, is that bliss is simply a state. It comes and it goes, like grief or like fear or like joy. The chasing after or the attachment to any state or vision, actually, it just keeps one on the wheel of samsara, right? So attempting to grasp, cling, grip onto bliss that might have unfolded on, during a retreat, and then believing that if it's gone, that one is not being successful. From the perspective of awakening or liberation, that doesn't really make any sense, because there is no chasing after specific states, right? Awakeness is a shift in identification. And within that, within awakeness, states will come and go. So bliss will come and go, grief will come and go, fear will come and go, depression might come and go, anxiety might come and go, right? That these states arise is not inherently a problem. It's just the human condition. So the way that one orientates to this reveals where one is on the journey as such, okay? So then going back to the front of the question, I'm looking for tips to successfully return to normal life after a yoga retreat, okay? So looking for tips to successfully return. So first I would ask, what does that mean for you? What does it mean to successfully return? And the way that I would define it, so when I lead retreats or immersions, residential experiences, I spend a significant amount of time, at least one session, looking at integration, which is the integration of the teachings and the practices that have been received and the shifts and changes that have occurred, how to work with integration upon leaving the retreat and going forward, because we never return, right? Returning itself is an illusion to a degree, because we are different. So what we experience is different. So there isn't a return. So that's another aspect. There is no return. There is only going forward. So what does it mean to successfully go forward or integrate after a retreat? From my experience, it's the ability to integrate the teachings that have been received and the practices that have been received into daily householder life. And ideally, on a retreat residential experience, there will be some guidance from the teacher on how to do that. Okay, and I'll come back, maybe give a few tips on how to do that. All right, so we're now successfully returning, have spoken into what that's about, to normal life. Well, what the fuck does normal mean? Like normal is a designation that is relative Do you want to return to normal life? What are you seeking? Why are you going on the yoga retreat? Are you doing yoga for flexibility, strength, to calm the mind? Are you practicing yoga for self-realization, awakening, liberation? What is this normal that you want to go back to, and why do you want to go back to normal life? What really is being asked here? So let me just feel into that. Successful return to normal life. Okay. My sense is that what many people experience when they leave a retreat and go forward into life is that there is a juxtaposition. There is, yeah, that's probably the best word. There's a juxtaposition between what they experienced in the retreat space and then what's being experienced in the home space. So what is being asked here, again, it comes back to integration. How do I integrate the experience that unfolded on the retreat so it starts to happen more and more in daily life? And then the thing is, it's tough to break habits. Absolutely. Breaking habits can be challenging, but you don't even need to necessarily fully break the habits per se. What is really beneficial or supportive is for there to be a shift in the orientation to what is happening, a shift in the orientation to habits. So habits might still be arising and unfolding, but rather than one being identified with them and them playing out in an unconscious kind of way, there instead is an awareness of the habit, which still might play out, right? But there's awareness of it. And that's always the first step in awakening, is awareness of what's unfolding. What I suggest in terms of how to successfully integrate a retreat experience with daily householder life is to choose one practice that was learned on the retreat experience and commit to doing that practice in daily householder life every single day for 40 days, right? So that's one method of integration, is to practice, take the practice and do it every day, because then you're building a positive or a beneficial habit of that practice in the daily life, and that practice is going to have ongoing impact on the physical, mental, emotional, energetic body, right? And so it'll start to bring in some of the stuff that was on the retreat into the daily household life. So one practice, integrate it, do it every day for 40 days. Second tip for more successfully transitioning, not returning, transitioning from retreat experience into daily life, is to choose one of the view teachings, assuming that you received view teachings on the retreat. And you may not have, you may have just received practices. But perhaps an insight arose for you, something really landed for you. A view teaching, for those of you that may not yet be aware, a view teaching is a teaching that suggests a way to perceive reality or to perceive oneself in order to awaken or liberate. So a view teaching is not ultimate reality necessarily, but it's a beneficial way to perceive reality in order to experience awakening and liberation. So an example of a view teaching is awareness, free and independent, is the cause of everything. It's a view teaching from the Recognition Sutras, written around 1000 AD by Shaimaraja, right? And so that teaching, when properly, first of all, you understand it with the mind, and then start to work with it in an experiential way, and start to inquire into it, and then live into it, and then eventually it becomes an embodied realization, right? So this is why the integration is so important, because on a retreat, you'll likely intellectually learn view teachings, but whatever, it's useless, in many ways. A view teaching really, it's not useless. Shouldn't be so harsh. But where a view teaching really comes into its own is when it becomes alive in you. So if you take one view teaching and you sit with it and you contemplate it and you play with it and you wonder, what would it feel like to know with my whole body that awareness, free and independent, is the cause of everything? And so daily working with that view teaching will unlock something within oneself that leads into greater awakening and liberation. So that's my tips on well, there's a few more actually. Let's do a few more. Why not? So 1, practice every day. Take a practice and do it every day for 40 days until it's integrated into the body-mind complex. 2, take a teaching or an insight that arose on the retreat and skillfully work with it for at least 40 days until there is some measure of it landing in an embodied and possibly even realized way. 3, recognize that you are not the same person that you were when you went on the retreat, and be prepared to allow aspects of the being, self-image, etc., to burn up in the flames of awareness. Loosen your attachment to who you think you are, in other words, but recognize at the same time that whilst you may have successfully burned through some self-images, some masks, some defense mechanisms, result in trauma, etc., that you are transitioning into a life where people have a fixed idea of who they think you are, and they're projecting that onto you. So when you encounter these people that think they know who you are, and then they project this image onto you of who they believe you to be, if you're still buying into that and playing into that, then all of a sudden you feel like you're back being that person again that you thought you no longer were. So just having aware of how that dynamic plays out is really beneficial, because with the awareness, when you start to interact with people and you can sort of feel, oh, they think I'm that, with awareness, there's a little more gap and a little more opportunity to not allow that old self-image to run in the same way. Okay. So just coming back to, so that's the other tip to recognize and to remember, is that you may have shifted and changed, and yet other people will not necessarily. They'll have ideas, and not only will they have ideas about who they think you are, but your shift and change may be threatening to them. And if they feel threatened by your shift and change, they will go into attack, withdrawal, attack, withdrawal, defense mode as such. So just be aware that this may happen, right? So then when it happens, you're not surprised. You're like, oh yeah, the teacher said that might happen. Okay, cool. And here's how I respond to that. All right, last piece, coming back to this, all my bliss quickly evaporated when I came home. Bless. So bliss is always there, right? It's always there, because everything ultimately is always there and accessible in the field. But this journey isn't about chasing bliss or experiencing bliss even. It's just it's like a side benefit that occurs. This journey is about awakening to what one is, you see, and it's very easy to get distracted by chasing the bliss and thinking that if you're living in bliss all the time, that, whoa, I'm awake, I'm living in bliss. No, you're just experiencing a lot of bliss, right? It doesn't mean that awakeness has unfolded. So don't get distracted, and realize that it's the way that you relate to and the way that you meet what is unfolding in reality. So if there is still rejection of or attachment to things happening, right, attachment and aversion, that's what generates suffering. And so attachment to bliss will ultimately generate the suffering, which is the ironic thing, you see. But when there's an ability to just let bliss come, let bliss go, in the same way that there's an ability to let grief come, let grief go, then the suffering is not being generated from the attachment to the positive state, bliss, or the rejection of the negative state, grief, right? There is just what's unfolding in the being. All right, that's probably enough from me to see if I can summarize in a beneficial way. Practical tips for successfully integrating a retreat experience to daily householder life and transitioning from the retreat experience to householder daily life. So see what I did there? I completely reframe the question. And in the rephrasing of the question, that's the teaching in some ways, right? And that is the teaching. So how do you successfully transition and integrate? Pick a practice, do it every day for 40 days. Pick a teaching, live into the teaching until you embody it. Recognize that you are not the same, that person that you were before the experience. Recognize that other people will perceive you as the same, project that onto you, and that some people may be threatened by the changes, and that those people's projections and being threatened may pull you back into or cause you to regenerate the self-image or the defense mechanism or whatever it was that you thought you dissolved, because the circumstances are calling for it again. And finally, Let bliss come, let bliss go. Bliss is not the goal here at all. The goal is to be at ease with whatever's arising. All right, that's me. My name's Kara-Leah. Blessings on your path. You can find more details down below, all the things.